With so many exotics to choose from, there's always fresh builds to make, with some that are whack and some that are wild. So today, let's talk about Karnstein Armlets. I've got a bit of a soft spot for Karnstein, as they used to be my go-to exotic for soloing dungeons when I was still learning some of the ropes of build crafting. While knowing what I know now, they certainly wouldn't be my first choice for that type of activity. They served me very well at the time, and I was really looking forward to revisiting them. Regardless of the time that's passed, however, Karnstein is still right up my alley, as they're an extremely defensive exotic, but they're also a unique one, tying that defense to a melee-based offense. I personally gravitate towards warlocks because they excel in defense, and as a result, I rarely find myself taking a close quarters approach since I just don't think it's what the class does best. There aren't all too many exotics on Warlock that are attached to melees anyways, and the ones that are, like Claws, Guile, or even Necrotic, benefit from using Warlock's powered melees, which can mostly operate at range. While there is always the option to throw hands, I'd find it to feel pretty counterproductive to what most Warlock builds were looking to do, that is, except with Karnstein. While an extremely simple exotic, that simplicity allows Karnstein to take a full-fledged melee approach without sacrificing the defensive strengths that, for me, define Warlock's kit. A strong majority of content we have available now brings with it a pretty decent amount of threat with lots of high damage, high health enemies, but Karnstein can still hold its own in the thick of things. It does, however, come with the downside of not offering any improvements to offense, meaning I'd often feel like I could take a lot of damage, but rarely deal a lot. That trade-off to me feels like a natural one, as it makes sense that choosing to have extremely high defense would come with reduced offense, but considering the current landscape of builds, that's surprisingly a bit of an outdated concept. Currently, most of the highest damaging builds also come with the highest level of survivability, which once again highlights how drastically things have changed in the last few years. Similar to how I felt about Nezarec, I think Karnstein is a great exotic with well-defined strengths and weaknesses, but put into the context of the game's current state, they represent a difference between Destiny's old design philosophies and their current ones. Karnstein is extremely outclassed by countless options, but that doesn't inherently make it bad in its own right. I feel exactly the same as I did during my time with Nezarec, where removed from the comparisons to the extraordinary, overwhelming power of Prismatic, Karnstein is still fun, unique, and interesting to build around. So if you're unfamiliar, the way Karnstein works is any unpowered or powered melee kill will grant you Cure ×3 and Restoration ×1 for 8 seconds, while finishers will grant you the Cure and Restoration ×2. While the effects do directly synergize with Solar through fragments like Ember of Empyrean or Ember of Singeing, Karnstein can be used on any subclass and with any melee ability. I'd argue this is one of its biggest strengths, as it gives you the option to introduce an extremely reliable source of healing on subclasses with less access to survivability, like Arc, Strand, or Stasis. For my money though, Karnstein really shines with glaives to up your melee output and get even more defense through their guards. I've only become more and more of a glaive enjoyer as time has gone on, and I think they're an extremely underrated weapon type. If you're looking to build around melees, glaives make a massive difference in that department, while also keeping some amount of mid-ranged projectile options. For me, this makes a massive difference on Karnstein, as I don't need to rely on powered melees or farming finishers to maintain my restoration, and with the projectiles and the guard, I can deal with a wide amount of situations without needing to constantly swap weapons. There's also loads of fantastic glaives available that, paired with Karnstein, open up some great synergistic builds on every subclass. Vexcalibur is just an all-around beast, Winterbite hits like a freight train, and Frost Armor with Karnstein is incredible, and of course there's also the class glaives. With so many options to choose from, you almost can't go wrong, and no matter what subclass or what glaive you want to use, Karnstein can be the perfect pairing. So to give you the specifics on the build, I decided to run Solar so I could synergize everything I could around Restoration. With that in mind, I chose to use Edge of Intent so I could not only use it to proc Karnstein's Restoration, but build up Intent's Restoration turret as a backup. The turret itself also applies ×2 Restoration instead of ×1, which is great for moments where I couldn't get a finisher off and needed that extra healing in a pinch. For my aspects, I went with Hellion to spread Scorch and Ignitions, which paired perfectly with Intent, as I could still dish out a lot of damage damage even when I was holding up my guard. For my second aspect, I went with Touch of Flame to amp up my grenades a bit, and paired with a fusion grenade, it could net me some great stacks of Scorch and hopefully some ignitions. Focusing on Hellion and grenades works really well with glaives as you lose access to your melee ability while holding one, but both the nade and class slots are always available no matter what I was rocking. For fragments, the big one in my opinion is Ember of Empyrean to maintain restoration through any solar kills, be it grenades, Hellion, or glaive shots, which ensured that no matter what I was doing, I was always maxing my restoration timer. Since I had so much access to refreshing restoration, I didn't need to add in Ember of Solace, which is a usual for me, so instead I chose to build the remainder of the fragments around spreading Scorch and causing ignitions. I went with Ember of Ashes to increase my Scorch stacks, Ember of Char to spread Scorch from ignitions, and finally Ember of Blistering for some extra grenade regeneration whenever I defeated a target with an ignition. The ignitions were also a great option for unstops, as with Ember of Ashes, just a few lobs from Hellion and a fusion grenade could activate one pretty quickly and take out a good chunk of their health. For my armor set, I went with Tech Sec as glaive melees count as kinetic damage, so I could take advantage of both the increased shield damage and the disorient whenever I was throwing down. With that in mind, I also went with Fatebringer as my primary weapon for another source of kinetic damage, and so I could activate the bonus from range whenever need be. For armor mods, I'd recommend taking advantage of fonts as much as you can to try to boost your stats, although I found this build to be a bit lacking in terms of orb generation. To try to offset that, you could add in firepower to generate some off of your fusion kills as well as Hellion, but since that wasn't exactly my main focus of the build, I didn't worry about it too much. I went with a full set of gunner armor with melee as their third spike, which landed my weapon stat at 132, my melee stat at 140, and my grenade stat at 128, which I was happy with. For the artifact mod, there isn't anything that synergizes with solar and not much that works with glaives or unpowered melee specifically, so I'd suggest rolling with whatever suits your preferred primary or heavy weapon. I went with anti-barrier hand cannon for my Fatebringer as well as kinetic rupture as an option to stun unstops with it, although I find it to be a pretty unreliable one and rarely used it. I also went with press the advantage and armorsmith so I could synergize with Tech Sec whenever I broke shields, and counter energy to net me some ability energy whenever I stunned a champ. I had a really great time with Karnstein, and I was honestly surprised at how well it could hold its own. As I mentioned at the top, it's an extremely defensive option, so while it didn't knock my socks off with how much damage it could do, I was able to take a lot of heat with it on, paired with Edge of Intent, and cruise through pretty much unscathed. It let me lean into that bruiser melee focused fantasy and dive headfirst into any crowd I could find with just about no issue, which was a lot more fun than I had expected. Restoration times 2 is a really fantastic effect on its own, and Solar Scorch and Ignition's output always feel great, but for me, it's really the glaives that make it all sing. The build has incredible survivability, great utility, and enough damage through Scorch and Ignitions to offset its defensive focus, while making it a far more versatile build than I had expected. Overall, I was really impressed and had a blast revisiting Karnstein, as it gave me the chance to experiment with a melee-focused approach that I often choose to avoid. It's an extremely reliable exotic that does what it says on the tin and does it incredibly well. It's hard to ask for much more than that in an exotic, and I can see why I loved it as much as I did all those years ago. Karnstein is fun, unique, well-rounded, and in my opinion, wild. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. There's a dim link down below if you want to give my exact build a try, or if you want to use it as the base for your own spin on it. Subscribe to the channel to keep an eye out for more videos soon, and let me know in the comments what you think of Karnstein Armlets.